public for just hanging off a little bit while we've had a few traffic problems in Matlock, which everybody's probably experienced in the last couple of weeks. So anyway, members, thank you very much. This is Derbyshire Dales Planning Committee. I'll open the meeting now. Item 1, apologies and substitutes, please, Simon.
Thank you, Chair. Just one apology, Councillor Colin Swindle. There are no substitutes.
Thank you very much. Item 2, approval of the minutes of the previous meeting. I so move. All those in favour, please show. That's been carried. Thank you very much. Item 3, declarations of interest. I am going to declare an interest in item 5.1. It's a personal interest as I'm a member of Darley-Dale Town Council. Any other members got any interest to declare? Nope. In which case then we'll move straight on. So applications for determination. This is 5.1. Application number 21/00643, full erection of replacement dwelling and swimming pool building modification to previously approved planning permission. 15/00718, full resubmission at Bent Farm, Farley. I have a number of speakers on this. I'll take them in order. The first to speak on this is Councillor Steve Crystal, the Chair of Darley-Dale Town Council. You have 3 minutes, Councillor Crystal, and then indicate when you have 30 seconds left. Thank you.
Thank you. My name's Steve Crystal. I'm representing Darley-Dale Town Council. We've made submissions with our comments already as to why we believe this application should be refused based on the material considerations. We as a town council would like to add that we are regularly approached by members of the public regarding the rights and wrongs of the outcomes of planning applications. Our position means that we must remain impartial and look at each application and comment based on its own merit. Some people will always argue that the comments we make are wrong or misjudged, and that's fine because we always consider the facts. So, what are the facts regarding the developments on Farley Hill in relation to this applicant? We know, given the history of this applicant, that if permission is granted tonight, any conditions imposed are unlikely to be adhered to. Even the planning inspectorate themselves couldn't enforce the conditions imposed on this applicant and his developments. We know that the applicant and his agent do not submit applications with all of the correct information or measurements, and that even when he does, he simply proceeds to build whatever he wants anyway. So the question is, have there been any independent measurements of this development, or are the officers and committee simply prepared to accept partial or potentially wrong information submitted by the applicant and his agent? One thing that we are questioned about on a regular basis is the amount of retrospective planning applications which this authority receives, and why there appears to be little or no enforcement to stop illegal developments at the earliest opportunity when the planning authority and enforcement officers become aware of issues. People usually comment about how it's easier to just build and then seek approval afterwards because of the lack of enforcement, often citing the number of successful retrospective planning applications. The cost involved if the applicant appeals often appears to prohibit enforcement or refusal. Therefore, the tail is wagging the dog, and this has to stop. Other authorities enforce breaches of policies which can result in demolition of illegal dwellings. Permitting this retrospective application tonight sets a very dangerous precedent to the whole of the Derbyshire Dales community, who are watching with huge interest. It is important that planning officers, enforcement officers and committee members reach the correct decision tonight, and that this application isn't just waved through because of the potential cost of an appeal. The applicants wouldn't be having difficulties with this application, or indeed with their neighbours, if they simply built what was permitted in the first place. Will the applicant stop here? Probably not. As per my previous comments, this developer, and indeed others, have consistently stuck 2 fingers up at this authority, so surely now it's the time for the planners and members to rise above this behaviour and enforce the local planning regulations and ensure that what is granted is what is actually built. Darley-Dale Town Council are requesting that this application is refused and the applicant is made to build what was originally approved.
Thank you very much, Councillor.
Thank you.
Right, just while the table's been cleaned down for the next speaker, and then I'll call the next speaker. Thank you very much. The next speaker on my list is Mr. Jason Farmer, Matlock local resident to speak against the application. I believe Mr Farmer doesn't want to be recorded, Jim. Thank you. So, Jason, if you'd like to sit down, you have 3 minutes. I'll indicate when you have 30 seconds left.
Thank you very much, Chair. I speak to you tonight as a resident of Farley Hill and not as my position of councillor of Darley-Dale Town Council. I am a nearby neighbour of Bent Farm and urge you to reject this application as it contravenes several national and local planning policies. It is a requirement of the Town and Country Planning Act that plans and drawings are submitted accurately to describe a development. Yet again, this applicant and his agent have deliberately resubmitted poor drawings that have no architectural value, they are not to scale and contain no floor levels, a tactic well versed with this applicant and his agent, in order to push their way through the planning processes until it is deemed too late for local planning authority to act. Even more worrying is the fact that the planning officers have felt it unnecessary for an independent survey of the development, relying solely on the applicant's drawings, which are clearly marked "do not scale" from this drawing or these drawings. It is rather convenient. It makes it impossible for anybody to compare the 2015 permission as to the built today. Planning for this development was indeed granted in 2015, but due to the scale of the development, stringent conditions were attached at the time. Again, the developer chose to go way beyond what had been granted, and just give me a second. And this developer chose to go way beyond what had been granted, and the frontage, a perfect example, now standing at 6.1 metres instead of the 3.9 allowed. Yet Mr Yarwood tries once again in his design statement to grossly underestimate the changes that have been built and made in the built form. Policy S4, development in the countryside, states that the planning will be granted in the countryside as long as it is appropriate to its location and does not have an adverse effect on the character and appearance of the rural area. I can assure you, Bent Farm definitely does have an adverse effect on Farley Hill. We are often stopped as members of the general public and asked, how the heck has that got through the planning process? To grant permission for this would be the same application that was rejected in April 2021, and the applicant, being the same applicant, a bit short of a poor landscaping scheme, would be tantamount to
30 seconds left.
Would be tantamount to rewarding incompetence and in its abuse of the planning system. I would really like you to all consider carefully your decision. You have been asked to consider a scheme that only marginally fell within its limits back in 2015 against what you hopefully saw on the site visit when you visited the site yesterday, which is, in our opinion, an overbearing, obtrusive by design building. There is huge feeling amongst local residents that due to the lack of enforcement regarding this development...
Thank you very much, Mr Farmer.
Okay.
Thank you. The next on my list is Mr Andrew Heading, local resident, to speak against the application. Similarly, you have 3 minutes. I'll indicate when you have 30 seconds left.
So, we find ourselves here again, being asked to give credibility to the same old work of Bent Farm fiction. The plans submitted, shiny and slick as they are, once again bear little relation to what's actually been built on Farley Hill. There's no scale and no accurate dimensions, just an impression of what the applicant and his agent think they can get away with. To an outsider, it must seem strange that a planning department, staffed by qualified professionals, would even consider a planning application that lacked accuracy and scale. That they'd not only consider it, but also recommend its approval is almost beyond comprehension. And yet, once again, that's what you're faced with this evening. For interested parties who don't live on Farley Hill, and believe me, there are many Dales residents, not just cowboy builders, who are following this situation with keen interest, there's something very odd about the way Bent Farm has been handled by this council's planning department. As Farley Hill residents, we don't think it's odd. We think it stinks to high heaven. At every possible turn, your planners have bent over backwards to give this applicant free rein to do exactly as he pleases, allowing deadline after deadline to be missed, numerous retrospective applications to be made, and offering countless, and I quote, invitations to put right the dozens of deviations he's made from the permissions granted. None are complied with, nothing's put right, and no consequences follow, ever. And yet, once again, your planning officer recommends you turn a blind eye to this blatant disregard and disrespect by granting approval. No wonder we say this whole situation stinks. So, what we're asking the Planning Committee to do this evening is this: to not be complicit in what could charitably be described as a planning disaster, but more accurately as something bordering a scam, and once again vote to refuse this planning application. Being complicit and voting for approval will give the green light to every road developer in the Derbyshire Dales. And I'll close with this question: if you don't draw the line here, where will you draw the line? Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next on my list is Miss Carol Mosley. Carol Mosley, local resident, to speak against the application. Similarly, you have 3 minutes, and I'll let you know when the 30 seconds left. And similarly, again, she doesn't want to be video, Jim. Thank you.
A lot of what I was going to say has been said by Andrew, but I challenge the legitimacy of this application. It's a long way from being a conventional planning application, and I am quite surprised that it was even accepted for consideration in this form. It simply consists of a series of computer-generated images with no scale reference, no floor plans, nor any detail that would make it possible for anyone to make a comparison between the as-built and the previously approved building. The application is essentially no different from the one previously considered. No new information has been provided, save for a few fanciful details regarding landscaping. An accurate and complete resurvey and measurement of the building should have been undertaken. Why was this not done? Probably because the changes made in the as-built form would become all too apparent to us all. I believe that this committee should refuse to even consider this so-called planning application. However, should members want to make a decision on this today, I can see no other choice but to refuse it again. It is simply not good enough just to say that you got it wrong the first time. There needs to be clear justification for a different decision, and there clearly is not. The proper way for the applicant to challenge a decision is through appeal, not by repeated applications to try to wear away the resolve of planning officers and members of this committee.
Thank you very much. The next on my list is Mr. Yarwood, the agent for the applicant. You have 5 minutes, Roger, and I will let you know when you have 30 seconds left.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, members. I'll refrain from commenting on some of the rather outrageous comments that have been made about me and the applicant. I'll concentrate on the application itself. Following the refusal of permission at the April meeting of the committee, the applicant has chosen to resubmit the application in the hope that you will feel able to support the application and avoid the prospect of an appeal, thus saving the applicant and the council unnecessary wasted time and costs. In resubmitting, we have taken account of some of the valid points made by members during the previous debate and have included specific proposals for landscaping and boundary treatments. What is clear is that the single reason for refusal of permission at the April meeting will not stand up to scrutiny, because it would only make sense if the dwelling as constructed was noticeably larger than the approved scheme. And I trust that some of you, having now visited the site, you will appreciate that this is not the case. As you will have seen on the site visit, the only significant alteration from the approved scheme is that the roof of the forward projecting wing along the roadside is higher than it was shown on the approved plans. This is in large part due to the fact that the ground slopes down away from the house, so instead of raising the ground level, the applicant has very sensibly lowered the floor level in that part of the building, and by then raising the roof by a metre, he was able to accommodate an additional floor. So most of the difference in height of the projecting wing is because the ground slopes down, so the floor level is lower. Of the 14 changes listed in the officer's report, 5 are not changes at all. The chimney position, the design of the porch, the roadside boundary, the relationship of the building to the roadside verge, and the extent of the curtilage are all shown to be in accordance with the previously approved scheme. The remaining changes are very minor cosmetic alterations of the type which are often made during the implementation of a permission without raising concern, and in several cases, as confirmed by your officers, are actually beneficial. The representations made against the application appear to be based on a false perception that the house as built is much larger than that which was approved. That is not the case. Insofar as they make valid points, the objectors raise criticisms that would equally apply to the original permission granted in 2015. Yet only one representation was made against the original scheme, and it's only now that the house has been built without significant alteration to its overall size or basic design that people have come forward to object. So to recap, of the 15 identified departures, 5 haven't happened at all, 9 are very minor and mostly beneficial, and the single significant change is due mainly to adapting the building to the ground conditions. It is surely clear that the reason given for refusal of permission at the April meeting will not stand up to scrutiny. The height of the house does not exceed the height as approved, the floor area is no larger, it is located on the same footprint, so how can it be argued that the changes have made the building overbearing, incongruous, or highly prominent? As I said at the opening, we hope the additional information that we've now submitted, and with the benefit of your site visit, you will have a better understanding of the development and will now feel able to approve the application and avoid both parties having to endure a potentially costly appeal. Finally, might I say once again, what a lot of fuss over so very little. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Norwood. So that's the end of the speakers. So now I'll go over to Gareth. So if you want to do your presentation.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Members visited the site yesterday to actually go on site and physically look at the building as constructed. The alterations that were made from the original plans were pointed out to them on site and explained as to what those were. So there was the raising of the roof of the single-storey element at the front. Members were advised about the changes in the window types. They were advised about the changes in the eaves height from the original plans of the eastern side of the main element of the building. They were advised about the changes that were undertaken to the swimming pool building with the changes to the numbers of openings, the positioning of openings, the laying of the actual boarding. They were also taken to the highway verge to explain why on the original permission it showed a boundary wall that was running along the whole frontage of the building, where in fact that has come to light that that cannot be provided because it's within the highway. So therefore, the building, as detailed on that plan, has to be considered to be different to what has actually been constructed. The way the applicant has sought to address that is by submitting details, further details, about how he intends to erect the boundary wall along the frontage where it doesn't incur into the public highway, and we have visited the site as officers with the members of the local highway authority to address that, to look at and address that issue. That's all I'll say for now, Chair. I'll take questions.
Right, thank you. Before we go to questions, there's a bit of late correspondence, so if members want to read that first before we proceed to questions. Are members happy? In which case, then I'll open it up to questions. Councillor Purdy.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I need to refer to the speakers, if I may, first, because I think some matters need to be cleared up for the benefit of not only this committee, but the public attending. There's been some very strong accusations and inferences made about being complicit, this authority or our officers being complicit, and I personally take strong objection to that, Mr. Heading. Nobody here is complicit in anything. If I can refer to our solicitor, please, just to get some confirmation on some of the emails that have come in today. So what to do if your application is refused or delayed? If the authority refuses permission or imposes a condition, it must give written reasons. That we have done. If you're unhappy or unclear about the reason for refusal or the condition imposed, talk to a member of staff at the local authority planning department. That has happened. I met on site with Mr. Slack and Mr. Bradbury several weeks ago. You can then ask if the changing of the plans makes a difference to your application if it's been refused. You're able to submit another application with modified plans free of charge within 12 months, and that applies to every applicant for planning in this country, and that is the right of this applicant. Yes, the applicant can appeal or go to the Secretary of State, but the first raison d'etre of planning is that you must approve unless there are very good reasons for refusal. So I take objection to some of the statements here, and I'd like the officer to just pick out one of the comments, please, Gareth, in the additional information before us. This argument on discrepancy on frontage permitted, 3.9 metres, the writer is stating that it's 36% higher. That's not what I saw on site yesterday, so I'd just like you to clear that up, please. So I think what we have before us, members, and hopefully Kerry will confirm this, is that we are judging this on its merits, and that is what this planning committee is about. We can't get involved in neighbourly disputes, and that's not the remit of this committee. It's here to judge plan application on merit. It has no sway with the applicant or its agent, or indeed you. We're arbitrary, we're professional, we make our valid judgments. Thank you.
I'm not quite sure what you're asking me to confirm there, but I couldn't have put it any better than what you've actually said yourself. You know, none of us, you know, are here with, you know, any personal connection with the, you know, with the applicant, and to say, you know, to say so is, you know, quite grossly, you know, and I also take slight upset from, from some of the comments that have been said tonight, because we're here to judge the application on the merits of, of the case, as you have, eloquently put. And, we, as a council, these applications are put to us and we decide them within planning law. We get given the guidance of how to decide, planning applications, of which you all receive training and are all, aware of what you can and cannot do as, when deciding these applications. This is a retrospective application, as we know, and that does not give the authority to look at this in any unfavourable terms. We are still looking at it on the planning merits of this case, and if there are any planning reasons why you as a council, the members wish to refuse this application, then they have to be on planning grounds, which, we all here are, all very well and aware of that. And, we cannot stray from what the law allows us to do. And if the decision is made to refuse, then of course the options to the applicant is to resubmit with different, with different elements to their application, or is to appeal. And we are not here to judge how the applicant is to utilise his ability to, proceed through the planning process. We're here to answer the question of should this receive planning or not. That is the question that, that you are here to, to answer. Any personal and personalities of the, of the case involved is unfortunately not a planning matter, and that, that is not, here for, here for discussion. We are here solely to read through the papers and to listen to what the officer's recommendation is and to make up your own minds. And that's what I hope you will all do.
Thank you, Kerry. Gareth, do you want to come back on Councillor Purdy's point?
Yes, I would. I think I need to do this. It's best if we use. Can you just go to the original plans? Yeah, that's not the best one. Keep going. Right. No, go back. So the building that is quite fundamentally different, if you like, from the original plan is that the element that's on the left-hand side of the building, where the applicant has drawn. Well, this is what I think it's been. What the difference is between the approved plan and this is essentially as built. Now, if I can you go to the original plans? So you can sort of see the height of that element. Now, if we look at this plan, you'll see the, let's go to the next one, sorry, Chris. Right, if you look at the bottom left-hand drawing, you'll see the single-storey element projecting off. You'll see that the eaves line is literally just above the doorway, above the door height. So you can see that that is certainly a single-storey element, and it was part of the design philosophy for stepping up the building. Now, the applicant has obviously increased the height of that without permission. If you go back to the... so it now appears in that form. Now, officers have to consider, in that form, does that substantially harm the building from that as approved? And the officers come to the view that whilst it's not what was approved, and it would have been preferable to have had the scheme undertaken in the way proposed, it has to then say, is that so harmful that would justify refusal of the planning application? And the view that officers have come to is that we don't feel that is. there are other alterations. There are alterations to the windows from the original scheme. Can you go back to the... What I'll try to do is I'll try to just quickly explain the original scheme and where there are points of difference. So, if we look at the main house element, if you like, you will see the roofscape, you will see where it drops down. That drops down on the ridge, it also drops down on the eaves. As built, it doesn't drop down with the eaves. It drops down at the ridge, but not the eaves, so that's a difference. The windows have got a vertical proportion, if you like. Now the windows have a more squared proportion. They're more squared than they are vertical. If we look at the swimming pool building, you will see vertical timber boarding coming down and beyond what were 3 openings in that elevation. You will also see that it's fully vertical boarded on that top elevation. If we look at you will see that the applicant has not put in 3 openings at the bottom, he's put in 2. He's also put in horizontal boarding. He's also put in a large window at the top. So there are clearly differences between what was approved and what is now being built. But what our officers have to assess is, are the changes so harmful that it would justify a recommendation of refusal on those grounds? And the view we have come to is that no, if you take each of those individual, you know, it does change the original character and appearance of the original scheme. But in terms of the general thought process, the design, the scale, they've not changed. What has changed is certain elements of the building are different to what was approved.
Thank you very much, Gary. Councillor Slack.
Thank you, Chair. I wish to ask a question.
Pardon? We're still on questions.
Two questions to planning officers, first of all. Are you confident that with this new planning application, the conditions will be geared to? Are you confident of that? And if, will you check it every so often this time to see if is there any differentiation leading away from what it's supposed to be? If it's checked fairly often and it deviates away from what we've agreed, will you stop it immediately? You've the power to stop it immediately and bring it back to committee.
The key elements, as we said before, is that the building is nearing completion in its construction. There are elements that need finishing off. But what we have required as officers, or recommended as officers, is that we want to see this development move on to what it's ultimately proposed to be finished as. So we've put a condition, well, we're recommending a condition that within 3 months of this permission, if it was allowed, that they would have to submit full details of that landscaping. They've given an indicative, we're going to plant trees here, we're going to do this, we're going to do this to the boundary wall. We've put a condition on that that needs to be submitted within 3 months of any approval. We've also put a condition on that, as part of that same condition, that all the hard surfacing and the boundary treatments have to be provided in accordance with the approved details within 12 months. And all the soft landscaping has to be carried out by no later than the 2021-2022, as in this year running through to March is period in which to introduce landscaping. If they're not provided, either by getting the condition details to us or actually provided on the site, we are in the position to say you are now in breach of that condition. And that has given a clear time frame in which that needs to be addressed. one of the conditions on the original scheme, which was never complied with, as far as we are aware, was that they needed to provide a swallow compensation scheme, because with the previous, if we go back to when it was previously a farmhouse and agricultural building, Derbyshire Wildlife Trust said, well, if you're going to replace that, we want a swallow compensation. Now, we've not seen that scheme to date, so we've put a condition on that within 6 months of the date of this permission, that shall be submitted to us, and once it's agreed, then it needs to be put in within 12 months. So again, we're setting down time schedules to get those things that were outstanding elements of the original permission sorted out, basically. Yeah.
Yeah. Will you give us a report every so many months how it's going on? I know it's unusual to do that, but this is a very unusual planning application. It's gone on so long, and there've been so many deviations from what it should be. It's gone on many years now, so we really got to keep an eye on this, haven't we? And if you report back to committee and say how it's going, and give us a report.
Probably better placed to respond to that particular question or comment from Councillor Slack. Just to provide some balance to some of the comments that have been made by the speakers on this application, the local planning authority does take enforcement seriously. Comparatively with other Derbyshire authorities, we serve more notices than other authorities, and we don't sit back in terms of looking at breaches of planning control on this particular site. We're aware of other matters, and we're working hard with the applicants and their agents to try and address those issues. We're not sat in the office just forgetting about this site. There are issues that we are actively seeking to resolve. This will be another matter that will be added to that list, and we'll be actively monitoring progress in terms of complying with that condition, and members are welcome to contact us to get an update as to where we are with receiving the information we require to satisfy us that the condition will be appropriately dealt with. So the invitation's there. If you want an update, that's fine. I think it'd be inappropriate for us to treat this applicant any differently to anyone else in terms of providing you with regular updates as officers, but I think you're welcome to make inquiries with us, and we'll be able to assist you where we can.
Are you happy with that, Peter? Okay, Councillor Burfill.
Partly for clarity. So the first one is, do the 14 discrepancies that we've got listed on page 10 and 11 still stand? And if so, did the officers consider the cumulative effect of these discrepancies? That's the first question.
My view is that the discrepancies do stand. I know the applicant's agents felt that they didn't, but things like where the boundary wall was detailed on the, can you just go to the approved plan? No, going wrong way. That's it. Right, next one. Right. For example, you can see where the applicant age, or on the original permission, you can see the line of the boundary wall in relation to the house. That was the wall that was going down the side of the house. That can't be built in that form. That is a difference. And the reason being is because where the building is built, the element of that wall at the top part, at the top part, can't be built because that is on highway land. So I would stand by the points that I've identified as being differences between that scheme and what has actually been built. One of the things I forgot to mention was the actual building itself, the swimming pool building, has actually been moved back as built by a couple of metres. Now, that's possibly better than that scenario on there anyway, but nevertheless, that is another discrepancy. So I would stand by the discrepancies that we've identified. Now, cumulatively, do they mean that the scheme is so fundamentally altered to justify refusal? And again, I would say no, because we've looked at each of those points, and some of them, you could arguably say, might be a slight improvement. But others, we just don't feel that there are substantive reasons to refuse this application.
So the next question follows on from what Councillor Sachs said, actually. If the as-built is not according to the approved plans, how did it get to that point where these things weren't picked up as and when they were done not according to the approved plans?
When the building was originally going up, officers, myself and the enforcement officer went out. We'd actually took measurements across the whole framework of the building. Now, that was because before it had even been faced, we had concerns raised with us that it was going to be too big. Well, we took measurements and we felt, no, this seems okay. Now, subsequently, that element at the front that I referred to, which is Piers single story, that went higher than we measured at that time. But it was only come to light when you started putting the facings on that you could see the height of that element. And so that was identified. And then we could start looking at particular details, and then we started noticing that, well, hang on, these windows are different, and that building's different. So we did look at it. We've been out on site several times, measuring up initially, measuring up after he's built it, and we've been basically seeking for him to get an application in to seek to regularise the alterations for some time.
So I've got two more, Chair, if I may. So just for clarity, how much higher in percentage terms is the single-storey projection as compared with the approved plans? I need it in percentage terms. Percentage? Yeah.
Exact?
Well, no, roughly.
Well, I would say it's about 30% higher. If you look at that, Chris, could you? Yeah, that's what I'm saying, yeah. I mean, the applicant has submitted figures, but I believe that that has risen, not by what looks like about a quarter on that drawing, but more by about 30%.
Okay, thank you. So the final question is something that's confused me. At 7.19, it says the applicant has submitted general details as to how he intends to landscape the site, but has provided no detailed submission. But then at 2.7, it says the applicant has submitted details of landscaping as he considers that the absence of such details was raised as a concern at the committee. That seems at odds to me, those two statements.
Well, I would argue it's not at odds. What he's done is he submitted, as part of the drawings, details of the areas in which he would intend to plant. What he hasn't done is submitted what I would call a full, thorough planting scheme for, you know, tree types. He's identified these are the areas where I'm going to provide for planting. So that's fine. But what he hasn't identified to us is this is the type of planting. So what we have to do is we have to say, fine, well, in principle, planting that area would be fine. But we need to know, what are you planting it with? That could be conifers. That wouldn't be acceptable to officers. So we put a landscaping condition on to say, you need to give us the details of what exactly you intend to plant in those areas. But it's quite clear from the plan the areas in which he's intending to plant.
So if I just may come back on that, Chair, that sounds to me like, why aren't we asking for this detail before we're even considering this application tonight? If that's the only difference from the previous application in April, why didn't we wait for these details?
Well, at the end of the day, in most cases with developments, of any housing development, we will put a condition on and say that you need to provide us with a detailed planting scheme. Not necessarily at the outset when the application comes in. You will need to provide us with a detailed landscaping scheme and you will need to implement that. That is what we're requesting. A lot of developers will identify on plans, this is our proposed areas of landscaping. They won't necessarily specifically detail exactly what that landscaping is. So therefore, officers put conditions on to say, fine, we know where your landscaping is going to go, but now we need to approve that landscaping.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Burfield?
Sort of.
Councillor Buttle.
Right, Gareth, I'm not sure I entirely agree with you that the cumulative changes don't add up to a real change. And so I want to ask you about the design philosophy that you thought was appropriate when the original planning permission was given. And looking at those buildings, it looks to me like you wanted it to look like it had grown over time from a farm to a farmstead to an agricultural building, and then the agricultural building was brought into the grouping and turned into a swimming pool, and you know, the whole thing has got it's grown in place, which I'm guessing is why you asked for the break of line on the ridge line and why you asked for a break of eaves line on the main element of the building, and why you want the steppage elsewhere. And I'm just sure, is that the actual philosophy that was behind the original planning proposal's acceptance?
Yeah, I think if Chris can just go to the photos of the original farmhouse, you'll see characteristics. So what you see is basically a barn and then the farmhouse next to it. So, and you've got that transition in levels rather than having one continuous long building. You have that sense of two elements, if you like. One's slightly lower than the other. So that sort of design philosophy went through into the way we wanted to see the other building go. Bringing the buildings off the front, if you could go to the one with the wall, Chris. No, keep going. Of this, no, not this one, the old one. So, go back. So you can see, coming off this building, there's a high wall. So, in the context of the design, it was felt, well, possibly you could have a projection coming off, like you might an agricultural building, coming off the front, roughly where the wall is. But, again, we wanted to see that step down in a hierarchy. So you had the larger element and then stepping down to a single-storey element. The applicant lifted the single-storey element. So that came out of the philosophy. This was, I think that was the agricultural building that was on the site. Now, that was in a different location, but You can see it's in a different location. But it was felt that by pushing it back, having a lightweight link through, that what you're doing is you're trying to take a contemporary take on essentially the development that was there, but in a more contemporary manner, but drawing on some of the elements of the original building. So that's how the design philosophy came through.
Okay, that makes sense to me. Would you say that what we have now is a fair interpretation of the original philosophy, like an organic growth that's turned up there? Or would you say this is something that's just been dropped into the landscape?
Well, as I say, there are elements where there's differences to the original design philosophy, but if you're looking at that development, it's a case of how you regard it. I look at the swimming pool building, I regard it as a contemporary take on a more shallow-pitched sort of agricultural building. The nature of the step and the addition to the main dwelling is again a sort of an evolution of that. The one element that I found that I've had difficulty with was the element immediately at the front, and so you didn't get that sort of stepping up effect so much. So that was my main fundamental concern. But the other elements, I think, are reasonable. Yes, they differ from the original scheme, but I think it's reasonable.
Okay, I'll just come back with, I'm not sure if this is a question, but surely an agricultural building would have vertical timber, and this doesn't, and they've chosen to not make it look agricultural. Is that a change? Would you have accepted horizontal lines on the first application?
Just step in at that point. I think Gareth is in detail sort of explained the design philosophy. I think looking at the photographs of the original development, it was clear that you had a group of farm buildings, and what we're left with on site at the moment is what we feel is reminiscent of a typical farm grouping in terms of the general form and pattern of buildings on site. Now, we're getting into the minutiae, if you like, of the detail of a particular building. We feel as officers that the low-slung modern agricultural storage building element of this proposal is still reminiscent of that design ethos in terms of its general appearance and form. We don't feel that the changes that have been made are so substantial and significant to undermine that original character and design philosophy. So I think hopefully that answers that question.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next on my list is Councillor Gamble.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Gareth. You've gone through sort of a lot of the changes that between the original application and this application, but presumably because we are looking at this as a new application from the one that was refused in April, we need to establish what the differences are between that application and this application. Can you go through with me exactly what are the differences between that application and this one?
Yeah. There's more clarity as to how the applicant proposes to landscape across that frontage to soften off the views as you approach it up Farley Hill. Now, yes, we haven't got the detail, but officers will seek to secure an appropriate landscaping with trees and native planting so that it sits comfortably in that landscape of being native landscaping rather than domestic landscaping like rhododendron bushes or conifers. It will need to be of a type that is appropriate in that wider landscape setting. So as part of the condition, we will get a scheme in, it'll be presented to our landscape and tree officer for him to assess whether he feels that that is appropriate in that landscape, and then, as I say, the condition is that we get that planted in this next planting season. The other difference is there's more detail, and as I explained, there's more detail about how the boundary treatment actually is proposed, so that members could understand that as it is now isn't the way it's going to be, basically. It was explained. Can you get the plan up with the... Yeah, not the landscaping one, the elevation. Keep going, next one. No, next. Proposed. Yes, this bottom one. So you can now see how the boundary wall is being provided to the roadside to act as a foil to the building, whereas at the moment the building just stands there very much flat against the roadside. The boundary wall will just provide that bit of break and intervention into that. So they're the two main elements of what this scheme is, but I think the applicant also wanted to just try and prepare drawings that were, you know, more indicative of what he was aiming to provide on the site, basically, so members could look at it and say, all right, with those changes and those elements, does it assimilate better into the landscape than what we have seen on the previous drawings and with the photos? And also it's given the members opportunity to go and actually look at the buildings on the site and make that assessment actually on the site.
But presumably that was available in April when they looked at it in April?
They couldn't go on site in April.
Oh, right, okay. I wasn't here in April, so
No,
I was
sorry,
on planning, so
sorry.
I had no opportunity.
No, this was the first time that members have visited the site because because of COVID, it had to be dealt with through
right, okay.
through the Zoom meeting process. So we tried to provide photos to explain it, but this is the first time members have had the actual opportunity to go and stand and look at the building in its context.
Right. I mean, you've talked about a lot of small amendments that are quite different.
Yep.
The deviations from the original plan. So, I mean, surely the reason it's here in front of members is to do with the complete alteration in its oh, I've forgotten the word now, in its complete state, not just the individual elements, because presumably you would deal with individual elements that deviated by non-material amendments, would you not?
It might have been, it would have been probably impractical for us to do that through process because of the number of objections that we've had to the revised. Could we have done it on the original?
Answer that question, Councillor Gamble. The non-material amendment protocol that we have the District Council has adopted protocol is quite restrictive on what we would allow as being a non-material change to a development of this nature. Increasing volume of a building, for example, is an example of a change that cited as not being a change that we can accept as being non-material. So cumulatively, I think the changes are such that we would have invited an application. An application is what we've received and what we need to consider.
So what we're really talking about is not really small things. The cumulative things, as you said, they go beyond non-material amendments. Presumably, he's increased things beyond permitted development as well. Has he?
Well, I mean, if we look at the amendments, we could look, for example, at the porch and say, is that a non-material amendment? We could look at the ease line running through and make a view as whether that's a non-material amendment. The doors on the swimming pool building going from 3 down to 2. We could have looked at as a non-material amendment. But when you take, you know, the timber boarding going from vertical to horizontal. We could have looked at that as a non-material amendment. But when you look at everything in the round, and given that some elements certainly can't be dealt with under the non-material amendment, where there's been increases in size, the the setting back of the actual swimming pool building, those elements could never be dealt with through the non-material process. Some maybe we could have done, but what we've basically asked the applicant to do is to say, right, put in an application that we can assess retrospectively as to whether these are going to be acceptable. But there are certain elements that we could have said, well, don't put that in, we'll deal with that as a non-material amendment. What this does is it gives a holistic, these are all the changes that he's done, and this is our view on it.
Yeah, so would you agree, really, it is the scale to which it's deviated from the original plan?
Well, there are elements that I would say, because it's deviated from the plan, it needs to be reappraised as a fresh planning application. It's not capable of going through the non-material amendment process. But what I'm saying is there are some elements that if he hadn't have done...
As much.
What I'm saying is if he hadn't have... for example, those two doors in the front elevation of the swimming pool building, if he'd have said, I had 3, but I want 2, can we deal with this non-material amendment? We'd probably say, yeah, that would be reasonable to go from 3 openings at the front to 2. What about putting a window in at the top? Well, that's changing the character, so maybe not. Timber boarding going horizontal from vertical to horizontal. Change on the design ethos. So there are some things, as I say, that are non-material potentially, but what we've done is we've rounded up all the changes in one application.
Okay, thank you. Can you just answer another question on the process of how we've got here, really? Because for me as a newbie, having not only had 3 applications, my 3rd meeting, I'm just wondering how usual it is for us to be in this situation with a resubmission from an applicant who evidently, from what he said, didn't like what happened at the last committee meeting and didn't like the decision notice. How usual is it for him to, resubmit, I think as the agent said, hoping to support officers in unnecessary waste of money?
Councillor Gamble, I don't feel your question is appropriate. We're dealing with the application as is.
I was just asking how normal it is for us to be in this
situation.
situation.
I'm afraid, I'm not allowing that question.
As usual, don't worry.
Sorry.
I'm used to that.
So, anyway...
Right, I haven't got other questions, thank you.
Excuse me. I'm moving into debate. Councillor Burfoot, you similarly. I won't be challenged again. I'm the chair. Thank you. So we'll move into debate. It's open to you, members. We are in debate. Councillor Purdy.
Chair, thank you. There have been similar planning applications that have tested us over the years. I'm not going to name them, but this one is certainly probably at the top of the tree. The fact is that, as Gareth has explained, all those differences need to be regularised, and that's why a planning application has been sought and bought. And that's why I met with the applicant and John Bradbury several weeks ago at his request, and we then sought to get a planning application in, and with the treescapes and edging as you have before you. And I think it is important that the officers have control on this, and they can detail it to our tree preservation officer to get the right species in. I've explained before, for the benefit of the public, if I may, that the first raison d'etre of planning is that you have to approve. You have to say yes to a planning application unless there are significant reasons for refusal. I think that the applicant could have dealt with this better, I have to say, and I think the agent could have dealt with this better and helped this planning committee. But we're here and we have to deal with it and what is before us. So I'm going to move the officer's recommendations, Chair, on the basis that the cumulative effect, I don't think, would warrant us refusing. And I do think that an appeal would be successful. And that's not to say this authority should not afford the monies. We have to consider that's not our monies, it's public monies. So on the balance of experience over many years of being on a planning committee, I think that, yes, this could have been dealt with better. It could have been open and more transparent and honest in the way it's been dealt with. And I would invite the applicant to do that in the future, please. But on the basis of what we have before us, I can't see any alternative, Chair, but to move the officer's recommendation.
Thank you very much, Councillor Purdy. Councillor Lees.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'd like to second this, having been on site yesterday, and yes, we are where we are with this application, and looking at it from, with my builder's hat on, with 40 odd years of experience in the building trade, I do not agree with some of the comments made, like Councillor Purdy has alluded to. From yesterday's visit, I think we're very fortunate that we're seeing something. Yes, it's a retrospective application, but we're seeing the quality of what it is now, not what it could have been. It's been put together very well, in my opinion, and I like the quality materials, quality windows, and I'm quite happy to second this, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Lees. Councillor Gamble.
Right. I was going to ask about what officers would see as a significant increase in a building and would regard as substantial, as we've already seen the single attached dwelling now is a third bigger. I'm really not convinced that we've been given an application here which warrants us to be where we are now. I don't think it differs significantly from the application that went through in April. I still think that the original reasons, which were said that the building was incongruous, stands. And I also am afraid, I do disagree with the idea that we are where we are. That just says to the public, build what you like, and we'll just say we are where you are, and if you make it of nice enough stone and put nice enough windows in, we'll just roll it through, which I don't think is something we should be saying. We should be saying that we should be encouraging people to go through the proper process first. I think it's my point of debate, isn't it, Councillor Purdy?
Yeah, but
I think you had your chance.
Yes, I have, but I'd like to clarify the point. That's why there's a plan application here. Thank you, Chair.
Right, so I'm afraid I do come to a different conclusion. I think the cumulative impacts on this and how much is different from the plan does create a significant change. It creates a very different building. I think it does look like it's been popped down. I don't think it, I mean, to try and say this sort of complies with any sort of agricultural vernacular, I think just doesn't. It looks like, well, to me, it looks like some years down the line, I don't know what, I mean, it looks like a building that's built around a swimming pool, and I mean, an agricultural building, the centre wouldn't look like that. I'm afraid I don't agree with that at all. And I'm afraid I can't support the application on that basis.
Thank you very much. Councillor Archer.
I have to agree with a lot of what Councillor Gamble said. Actually, I keep it brief, but I think in terms of listening to the questions and the answers tonight, I think there has been a significant change in the character of this building, this development, because of the number of changes. Some of those changes I accept are relatively small, but the cumulative effect is a change in character of this building. And I think the 2.2 metre rise, over a third rise in the height of the building, I think if we were to approve that, it sends out a very, very dangerous message. The increase in height of a building on a skyline and so on, it has a massive, massive impact on the view, on the landscape. And I think, therefore, to approve this would set a very dangerous precedent, and we should not be seen to be doing that. It's gone against some of the principles of development that we discussed earlier in terms of it trying to keep that step up and make it seem like an agricultural building that's been developed over time. And I think, therefore, that cumulative effect, and particularly the rise in height of part of the building, means that we should not support this. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Donnelly.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Well, I'm happy to go along with the officer's recommendation, but what I would like to add to it the condition on 2.7 that we get clarification and feedback on that, that the actual detail is not totally forthcoming at the moment. But I think we should get more detail on that as part of the condition. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Lonnie. Councillor Fitzherbert.
I reiterate a lot of the comments everyone said here. It's a shame that we have to consider this application, but we've got it before us, we've got to consider it. And I do hope that we don't get here again, and so I agree with Councillor Donnelly's condition there. But it was incredibly useful to visit yesterday and see the site and see it, you know, up close, as it were. And I think we all agreed, we've all got a lot of sympathy for the officers. I'd like to thank them for their report and their time dealing with this application. And I'm sure they possibly could have come to a different conclusion, like some other members are tonight. And I think on that, I will support Councillor Purdy on tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Fitzherbert. Councillor Burfell.
The basic facts are that this dwelling has not been built in accordance with approved plans, and the discrepancies, some of which I can accept, are minor, but there are 14 in total, and I think we should be considering the cumulative effects of these discrepancies. The reasons for refusal in April were that the dwelling, and I quote, as built, is overbearing and incongruous in this rural setting and has a detrimental impact on character and appearance of this rural area, contrary to policy S4. Basically, I would say it's obtrusive by design. In April, members did conclude that the changes were beyond those that were considered to be acceptable, and I can't see anything in this report that makes me want to change my mind. In fact, if I'm honest, I don't think we should have been considering this application at all. We had a democratic vote in April, and the fact that it was refused by one vote, which, by the way, I'm a bit unhappy that that was actually quoted in the report as if that had any significance. A vote is a vote. And I think we're being asked to change our minds here, and I, for one, am not going to change my mind, so I will not be voting for officer recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Burfell. Councillor Slack.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I agree with Councillor Archer. I think some of the, you can, small deviation, but the large deviations, and it's not the first time, it's time after time it's happening. The comment to where we are is not answering the question. The question is, well, same as many of the speakers have put tonight, this is goes food too far, this is now, and we've got to really stand up and be counted, really. So I agree with Councillor Burfoot and Councillor Archer if we dismiss this.
Right, there's nobody else on my list. It's been Councillor Buttle. Can you be a little more quicker?
Yes, just I'll do it quickly. There is no chance whatsoever of us fitting a quick condition in to remove that dreadful window on the front of the swimming pool building, is there? You know, if this is something that would make it perfectly acceptable to me, I'd be okay with the thing. But I don't think I can vote for it when it's got this... Well, it just looks weird. It looks like it's out of place for Derbyshire. So, and I support the officers. I really hate not going with their recommendation. I really do, but I think I've got to go against it. I'm sorry.
Okay. It's been moved and seconded for approval with conditions. All those in favour, please show. All those against? Right, that's been carried. 7-4-5 against. So the motion's carried, so it's been approved with conditions. So now what I'll do is I'll have a 10-minute recess after that. and then we'll get back. So if everybody wants to come back at 22:08, and then we'll reconvene.
I thought it went the other way. I'm sorry, I thought we went the other way on that one.
Well, I didn't count them. I was relying on you two.
Shall we do it again?
Not now, Councillor Barefoot. You should have asked that the first time. I'm sorry. So I'll tell you what, we'll just take it again. So the officers and committee members, all those in favour of approval, please show. All those against? 6 and 6. So it's down to me. So I'll use my casting vote. I'll move for approval. Thank you very much. So we'll have a 10-minute recess now. Come back at 22:08, please. Right, moving swiftly on, item 5.2, application number 20/01306 full, Riverview, former Ford site in Matlock Causeway Lane, partial demolition of existing building, erection of a building comprising of 47 number apartments C3 use and a ground floor retail unit use class E, and associate works and change of use of ground floor of retained 30 Causeway Lane to retail E class and creation of additional apartment in upper floors. Now, we have got a little bit of late representation and I've got a few speakers. So if you want to look at the late representation first, and then I'll move on to the speakers. Right, members, are you happy before we move on? The first on my list for this is Mr. Ken Parker, Secretary of Matlock Civic Association, to speak against the application. You have 3 minutes, and I'll indicate when you have 30 seconds left.
Thank you. The representations we've submitted in relation to this application are reproduced in the report, but I want to concentrate now on what seems to us to be the key issue. We strongly disagree with the view that modern, large-scale design represented in this proposal is established practice in Matlock. With one exception, all the other modern, large-scale buildings are some distance from the town centre, concentrated around the northern end of Derwent Way. There is one large modern-style building in the town centre, which was erected about 10 years ago on Old English Road, and which is referred to in the report as the precedent for this scheme. But this existing modern building on Old English Road is lower than the original Old English Hotel on the corner. It's set back from the main road, so it's not unduly prominent, and it's in scale with its surroundings. This proposal is not comparable with Old English. This proposal will be much higher than the adjacent buildings. It's on one of the main roads into town, and it overlooks the park. It will dominate. The development proposed is 3 and 4 stories with flat roofs. However, the character of the town centre is predominantly 2 and 3 stories of local gritstone with pitched slate roofs. This is the context that the proposal fails to respect. The proposal therefore fails to satisfy 2 of the tests in the District Council's local plan. It will not contribute positively to the area's character, which is policy PD1. It fails in terms of its scale, height, appearance, some of the materials, and the overbearing relationship to the adjacent buildings and the setting. Secondly, it will adversely affect the setting of Hall-Lees Park, a key part of the town centre's conservation area, if for no other reason than its sheer bulk. It's a statutory requirement that the Council gives special attention to the desirability of preserving or enhancing the character and appearance of the conservation area. This proposal neither conserves nor enhances, so it fails policy PD2. We can understand the desirability of approving more housing to meet housing targets, but this does not mean setting aside the Council's own policies to meet short-term pressures. If the development goes ahead as proposed, it will have a permanent impact on the town. It will not just be an impact at this particular location either. Approval will set a precedent and make it much harder to resist other inappropriate developments. The distinctive character of Matlock Town Centre is at risk of being progressively lost. We're convinced a better design in keeping with the character of the site is possible. We've made constructive suggestions on how that might be achieved. But this is an inappropriate development in this location. We welcome redevelopment of the site, but it has to fit Derbyshire Dales District Council's approved policies, and this does not. It should be refused.
Okay, thank you very much. The next on my list is Mr. Jason Farmer. I'd like to wait just one moment while he disinfects. And doesn't want to be videoed, Jim. Okay, if you'd like to take a seat, you have 3 minutes, and I'll indicate when you have 30 seconds left.
Thank you, Chairman. As an owner of the property that covers 3 sides of this application, I felt important to speak tonight at this meeting. This site has had a previous application for housing withdrawn, was refused and then withdrawn, and I previously spoke against the previous Churchill development. When we heard of a similar application by another developer, we didn't have much confidence in what would potentially be proposed. We asked to meet the developer on site at the location and was positively allowed to share our thoughts and previous concerns on what we would prefer to be considered. This was taken on board with the design of the new application and has allowed myself to only speak positively about this application. It has allowed the Causeway Lane traditional street scene to remain intact, allowing the apartments to be built across the rear of the site behind the old showroom building. My son is a local councillor dealing with planning issues in the Darley-Dale parish. It is refreshing to have an open conversation regarding large developments. This proposal is a welcome use for the redundant site, and I wish to support this application.
Thank you very much. Very succinct. The next on my list is Miss Caroline McIntyre, the agent, to speak in favour of the application. You have 5 minutes, and I'll let you know when you have 30 seconds left.
Good evening. My name is Caroline McIntyre of Spring Planning, and we are the agents for this application. Our client, Clouds Developments, and their professional team have been working with your officers for the past year on a new scheme for this site. The team have carefully considered the reasons for refusal for the previous Churchill retirement scheme and have fully responded to these within the new proposals. The scale and massing of the new buildings reflect the heights of the adjacent properties, and the scheme provides an appropriate bookend to what's now known as the Mazzy building. The proposals will sit comfortably within their context and within the setting of the conservation area. We strongly believe that the architectural style and the use of local materials will create a high-quality new building, providing a significant enhancement and a positive entrance to the town centre. The design of the building is contemporary, but it's contextual. We consider that this is an honest approach that will complement the more traditional architecture within the town centre, rather than trying to deliver a pastiche of Victorian architecture. The former reception building within the Causeway Lane terrace will be retained and refurbished, providing a Class E unit to the ground floor and 2 apartments above. A further new Class E unit is proposed, giving an active frontage to Causeway Lane, and this has the flexibility to be a single unit, or it could be subdivided into 2 units, adding to the vitality of the town centre. The access to steep turnpike the access to steep turnpike is excluded from the scheme, removing any amenity concerns alongside Harley House, and the scale of the new rear building drops down to respect this property. The single access point, Causeway Lane, is closed, and the single access point, Causeway Lane, also helps enhance security across the site. Car parking provision has been increased, and each unit will have a parking space. Electric vehicle charging points will be included, along with secure cycle storage. High quality hard and soft landscaping will be provided within the courtyard, including new tree planting. The building design is highly sustainable, with further measures proposed such as photovoltaic panels on the roof of the rear building, which will provide all the electricity to the communal, external and internal areas. The SUD strategy for surface water runoff will significantly reduce the runoff from the site, and at present the site is covered in hard standing. However, in discussions with Severn Trent Water, we have agreed to reduce surface water peak flows to simulate a greenfield, undeveloped site. This results in an 87% reduction of flow for the anticipated biannual storm event and a 94% reduction of surface water from the site for a 100-year storm event. The Environment Agency have confirmed they're now happy in principle with the scheme. However, due to a gap in their own data, we were required to undertake further modelling of potential flooding from the river. This has involved all sorts of surveys, including boat-based surveys along the river, and this updated data has gone back to the Environment Agency for their sign-off. This concludes that the proposed residential apartments, which are all above ground floor level, are not at risk of flooding. The built footprint on site would also decrease by 26% over the existing condition at ground floor level, which would increase the floodwater capacity on the site. And the modelling also concludes there will be no impact on flooding to other properties from the scheme. In summary, the proposals deliver a range of benefits, including the redevelopment of a vacant eyesore site at an important entrance to the town centre, a new high-quality design building which respects the context of the site, will significantly enhance the character and appearance of the local area and the setting of the conservation area, an energy-efficient building that incorporates renewable energy technology to deliver a highly sustainable form of development, 48 new 1- and 2-bedroom apartments, making a substantial contribution to the council's housing targets, associated local spending in the town centre from new residents, new active retail frontages to Causeway Lane, providing new employment opportunities, sufficient car parking within the site and facilities for electric vehicle charging and cycle parking, significant improvements to surface water drainage, no issues of flood risk to the proposals or the wider area, and a significant financial contribution towards delivering the council's affordable housing objectives. We therefore urge you to follow your officer's recommendation and approve this application today.
30 seconds left.
My client and the team are available for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. That's it. So, who's taking this one? You are.
Chair, yeah.
Chris.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's important, just before I address some of the comments that have been made, just to clarify what the resolution is here, because obviously there's a change in the late representation sheet. What we're seeking is delegated authority to be given to the development manager or principal planning officer to be able to issue a decision following the withdrawal of the holding objection from the Environment Agency, the imposition of any conditions that they recommend, and the conditions that we recommend in our report, but also subject to the completion of a Section 106 agreement, which delivers now £195,000 towards affordable housing. The developer, in agreeing to pay that enhanced contribution, has reflected on the independent viability assessment work that's been undertaken, and the scenario 2, where there is a possibility of an uplift in gross development value of 2.5%, which would indicate a developer contribution pot of £195,000 that would be achievable. We think that that's a fair offer. At this moment in time, based on current gross development values, the independent viability expert that's been appointed to look at this application has indicated that the scheme is only viable with a developer contribution of £55,000. So we feel that is a reasonable offer, and an offer that should be accepted. It ensures delivery of these, of the development and the residential component of it and the commercial element, and it delivers a scheme that we feel is compatible with its surroundings. We've we have, or I, as the case officer, have set out in detail why I think the layout, scale and design of the building is appropriate in my report at sections 7.11 to 7.16. I do accept that this building is different in terms of its form and general appearance. However, it is an architect design scheme that is true to the concept, which is contemporary architecture. There are examples of other contemporary buildings with flat roofs around the town. The extension to the town hall building is just one example of those buildings. There's the development on Bakewell Road. There's the Corder Quarry development, and obviously the Old English development. So this isn't a copy of those developments, but it's a reinterpretation or a different version, if you like, of that contemporary form of architecture. The plan that's on the screen currently that members can see, that shows the wider Causeway Lane street scene, and you can see the scale of building on the right-hand side there. What is difficult to see on that drawing is the faint outline of the buildings on the opposite side. But I think when you look at the street scene in its totality, we feel that the scale of development on this particular site is compatible with this part of the town. With the flat roof and with the fourth floor reading as being part of the roofscape due to the treatment of materials, it being in deep recess, we feel that it won't appear out of scale and character. Hence why we're recommending approval of this application. It does deliver lots of benefits in terms of housing, commercial opportunities, employment, retains an active shopping frontage, and it will be an enhancement to this part of the town and makes use of a brownfield site that is currently underutilised. Delivers benefits in terms of surface water attenuation and discharge, and it would also be a flood resilient scheme. So we are recommending approval. Happy to take questions at this stage.
Councillor Slack.
Chris, this £195,000, it's a very, very small percentage. What would you say the percentage was of this grant, 106 agreement?
If you
47 apartments, and only £195 in affordable grant. I wouldn't call that excessive by the long way.
For a development of this nature, we'd usually take a contribution in the form of an off-site financial sum towards affordable housing elsewhere, because it's difficult to deliver affordable housing on a flatter development of this nature in terms of the management and maintenance of those units. However, if you were to apply the formula in the supplementary planning document on developer contributions, based on this level of development, this is a ballpark figure, you'd be looking at a figure of approximately £600,000 towards affordable housing for it to be policy compliant.
Can I come back? As you say, on 47 apartments, it won't be 5%, will it? Won't even reach 5%, will it? The £195,000
it's expressed.
Won't reach 5%.
No, it's expressed as a financial contribution.
Very low, that is. Chris.
Yeah, just to clarify,
it's not acceptable, really.
It's expressed as a financial contribution, not
this
as
is a big development.
All
the flats will sell there. So I think that's very poor. Sorry.
But what you've got to appreciate is that we've had a viability argument presented to us, and there's got to be an incentive to developer to develop this particular site. And if you can't achieve a level of developer profit and deliver development on the site, for that to stack up financially, then the site won't get developed. We've had the viability appraisal that was submitted with this application independently assessed. And what that's flagged is that whilst the applicant indicated that no contributions were possible, it did indicate that there was scope based on current gross development values and construction costs for a very modest contribution, but that has been enhanced on the basis that there will be an uplift, or maybe an uplift, due to the location of the site and it being a desirable location to live in the value of those properties. And the applicant has agreed to meet that uplift in value and make an enhanced contribution for that reason. But they're taking a lot of risk with that, because they're absorbing obviously higher construction costs, and it is a risk, but it is an enhanced contribution that is acceptable based on today's assessment of the viability of that project.
Okay. Councillor Purdy.
I personally think it's a very good contribution, especially given the fact it's been checked by our viability officer. They are facing rising costs. Chris, my question is, on site yesterday we had some very good pictorial representations. You said they were available for the committee.
Yes, I have included them. So we've got a 3D perspective of the Causeway Lane frontage building here. But I think what you're more interested in is the view that you get as you approach the town and the relationship with the football club. So that gives you an idea as to what you would appreciate as you approach the town from the east and the southeast, and there you get a sense of the scale of the building, but also how it's broken up by the changes in the parapet height. And what this image doesn't show is that part of the building is accentuated out towards the football ground to help break up the massing and the length of that rear building. The 2D plans don't really show the detail and the complexity of the elevations, but with getting the detail right and making sure that things like window reveals are deep, we get good quality materials on site, and that the detail and the finishes are appropriate to the location, we feel this will be an enhancement to this part of the town.
Have you got that front-on view that we saw yesterday, please?
Yeah. So the front-on, this is what this doesn't show is the wider street scene, because this terrace of properties is slightly lower than the adjacent terrace, and then obviously you've got the Ritz and the former, the Marzi building on the end.
Thank you.
Councillor Gamble.
All right, thank you. My question really is about, obviously, a part of the recommendation is to approve the development subject to the holding objection from the Environment Agency being withdrawn. Have we actually had communication from the Environment Agency that they are going to withdraw that objection?
Yeah, it's covered in detail in the flooding and drainage section of my report. Basically, the Environment Agency issued a holding objection because there was issues with the flood model that was carried out by the developer. They've since entered into extensive pre-application discussions with the Environment Agency to address their concerns and to provide an updated flood model which addresses their concerns. We're just waiting on them to confirm that the revised details are acceptable, and the resolution is authority be delegated to us that we can grant permission subject to that holding objection being withdrawn.
So the conditions, are they the ones that the Environment Agency asked for?
No, the resolution is the conditions to give authority to the to officers, so to development manager or principal planning officers, to grant permission subject to the holding objection from the Environment Agency being withdrawn, the imposition of any conditions that they recommend in their final response to us, and the conditions that we're recommending in this report.
So I just wanted to, sorry, it's a shame really, because I think the design is very good and I think there's lots of very good things about this development. It's just that I really would have liked to have had this come to committee with the full report from the Environment Agency. I mean, do we know that they're not going to want to change any design elements or anything like that?
Well, if you've read the report, the Environment Agency are very specific on what their concerns are, and it is purely about the modelling data that's out there, and that needed to be updated and corrected, and it has been done to their satisfaction. It's just we're waiting on their confirmation.
So it's just a formality. That's what just checking.
It's technically a formality. I mean, I will never say that there's no prospect of them coming back raising further objections, but I think that's highly unlikely.
Okay,
thank you. Councillor Burfield.
Thank you. I've got 4 questions, I think. I don't know whether I've missed this, but is the paving on site, is it going to be permeable? That's the first one.
Yeah, you'll note from the conditions that there's a requirement for a detailed landscaping scheme to include all hard surfacing. The intention is to increase the depth of the existing pavement to the frontage building, but the treatment of that and any street furniture and the actual detail is to be agreed.
There have been some concerns raised about the number of parking spaces. Now, can I just say that, you know, to get parking spaces in a town centre location is quite unusual, really. But if my maths is correct, we've got 47 flats plus 1, so 48, yeah. And we've got 3 designated disabled spaces. So if none of the residents had a disabled parking ticket, that means we're down to 45, so they wouldn't all get a space.
No, but reflecting on the town centre location of the site, this is quite unusual to have a development of this scale in this location with the level of parking that's provided. We're very close to having a space per new apartment that's created. The local highway authority did accept to reduce the level of parking provision on site, reflecting on its sustainability and location in the town centre.
I'm not saying don't have any disabled spaces, honestly. I just wondered whether any more parking spaces could have been squeezed in somewhere.
With this, the extent of parking is significant on this site. It includes the whole of the undercroft area and the additional space and area of space that isn't developed, which is dedicated to parking. So it is quite extensive and a significant provision in this case.
No, I'm happy with that answer. I noticed on 5.14 the sports development manager has mentioned about the tennis courts being in desperate need of resurfacing. Have we asked the applicant about that, and what was the answer?
The difficulty we've got is to be SIL compliant. There needs to be a capital project to spend any developer contributions on, and I think it has to be demonstrated that the needs arising from this development put pressure on that particular facility to warrant contribution being made, and we haven't got that level of detail, unfortunately. And because where we are with viability, we have to prioritise where the monies that are available are spent, and as a council, affordable housing is a priority of this authority.
And the last question, members will know that I often bring up the issue of the colour of bricks, and I noticed that the Urban Design Resource Officer at Derbyshire County Council has said he seems a little bit concerned about the colour of these London stock bricks, because he says they can look yellow against birch over stone. So can we make sure that we don't end up with something that looks yellow? I mean, I always point to the Moor Edge development as being the ideal colour of brick, but can we make sure that we're not going to end up with something that does look yellow?
I think I'd share those views. I think it needs to be a complementary buff brick. I mean, there are examples of buff bricks. I don't like using First Parade as an example, but there are brown and buff bricks in that development and the rear of some of the buildings adjacent to this development. But it needs to be a good complementary brick to the stonework on that frontage building.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Fitzherbert.
Can we move into debate?
I've got one more down of questions, so I'll move to Councillor Buttle and I'll put you down for debate, Councillor Fitzherbert.
Chris, the cycle parking, the cycle storage, is there any provision for what will be very popular in the future, electric bicycles? Or are people going to have to take electric bicycles up to their flats to charge them?
There are proposals for electric charging points for vehicles.
Yes.
We could, although I'm aware of a secure cycle store, I'm not aware of charging points for bicycles as such, but it's something we can put in an informative to encourage that. And I'd have thought, as part of a modern development and with the popularity of electric bicycles, that's the sort of thing that would be considered anyway within any modern or new cycle store building.
Yes, I would have hoped so as well, but it's getting your head around whether or not how you actually charge the people for the electricity for that particular bike. So I can imagine it's reasonably nightmarish, but if there's a way and a method of ticking a box for them to say, yes, we're going for it, I'd love that to be put in there.
Could you add it as a footnote, Chris?
I think, well, we can add it as a footnote. I think it's very detailed, isn't it?
It is very detailed.
But I think it's something that the applicants here, and they'll take that away, and it's probably something that they've already thought about and probably will provide
I'll
anyway.
just bring Kerry and our solicitor.
E-bikes, because I'm part of the mountain bike community, and a lot of them have removable batteries that you can take them up to your own, plug them into your own mains. I know not all of them do before I get shut down, but there are certain e-bikes that do. You do take the battery off to charge.
One with the battery built into the frame.
Yeah, so there is two different types.
It goes both ways.
Okay, thank you very much. Now we'll move into debate. Councillor Fitzherbert.
Well, thank you very much, Chairman. I think it's very useful for all of us that were on the site visit yesterday to go and see this, to actually see, we've all driven past it several times, lots of times, to see the extent of the site and to see, that it is desperately need. I didn't know the history of the previous applications, but it's interesting to hear about that when we were on site to see how desperately it does need a new life, etc. And I'd like to thank the officers for the report. I'd particularly like to say that just looking at we have determination targets, don't we, on the first page of the applications, and it should have been determined on the 23rd of March. But I think the extra 6 months has made more negotiations, which have been well worthwhile, I think, in the massing and the architecture, as you can see from those projected images on the screen as well. And you know, I'm sorry that some people in Matlock aren't completely happy with it. I just see that as a dead area, and I think it will be. I hope it very much will be a wonderful addition to the housing stock in Matlock, and by the award-winning Hawleys Park, of course, with our operatives there. So I'd like to forward the proposal for recommendation.
To move it. Thank you very much, Councillor Fitzherbert. Councillor Purdy.
I'll second that and echo Councillor Fitzherbert's comments. I was on that last application, and it was really slated, quite frankly. It was awful. We haven't got the most iconic building at present there, so I want to thank the applicant and the agents for the conversations with our officers, which shows graphically the difference between this application and the previous one, which is why you can come to a good settled agreement and without any rancour. So I do thank them for those contributions. I'm sure that there's always going to be arguments about design, and I thought earlier on in the conversation that in conversations in pubs you're told not to talk about sex and politics. Perhaps we shouldn't talk about sex, politics and planning in conversations, because it always draws divisive opinions. I think this will be a significant contribution to the town centre scene, especially because, you know, we've got on the doorstep the opportunity for young people to get an apartment, to get a flat, to get a key to their door. And I listened to the argument for the car parking spaces, and I smiled because, you know, we're supposed to be on a green agenda and banning cars in essence. So there's a dichotomy there. We're not going to fulfil every tick in the box. I think that what we've got here is a significant contribution to Matlock Town Centre. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Purdy. Councillor Burfoot.
Thank you, Chair. Well, obviously, I'm a member for Matlock, so this is very important to me, what happens on this site. It is a prominent site. It's a brownfield site in a well, it couldn't be really any more sustainable location than what it is. And I think I've tried to make a list of all the things that I think are positive, like the PV panels and the EV charging points, the bike store, retaining number 30, Causeway Lane, and the active frontage. And it is a contemporary design, and that, like Councillor Purdy said, there will be arguments, and there have been at Matlock Town Council. I, for one, am prepared to accept a contemporary design. I think this application is much improved on the last one. You know, to try and do a pastiche, as the agent said, of what we've already got, I don't think it would happen, to be honest. I hope I don't regret this, but we will see, won't we? But I'm certainly prepared to support the application.
Thank you very much, Councillor Burfoot. Councillor Slack.
I don't always agree with Councillor Purdy, but I do on this occasion. I think it's a much better design than what we had at the very beginning. I think I think it picks up the character of the other shops and that, and I think it's the design is first class. But I am disappointed about the affordable housing grant. I think we should have a lot more of that. And I'm also very concerned about the flood aspect. I know this area very well. I've worked on the Environment Agency, and I know them gates, they close when the flooding comes and the park's sealed off, and all the water coming off the hillside will come down and can't get away. It will stand in that area. It floods a football pitch fairly readily. So it's still a very dangerous area for flooding, even though they've approved it at the moment. So that's one aspect I'm very concerned about. But on the design side, I think, yes, I agree with the design side of it. But I'm not sure I can support it because of the affordable housing is very, very poor. I mean, we're falling back on affordable housing grants. So, thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Slack. Councillor Elliott.
As far as I can see, this is a great town centre proposal, much needed, and it's all been said basically, but I will definitely be supporting this motion tonight. Excellent.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Nobody down on my list, so it's been moved and seconded for approval. All those in favour, please show. All those against? Any abstentions? 11-4. So it's 11-4 and 1 abstention, so it's carried for approval. Thank you very much. Right, moving swiftly on. Item 5.4. Find it on my list. .3, should I say, is application 20/01129, which is a reserve matters application. It's the former Harvey-Dale Quarry, Dale Road, Matlock. Reserve matters application for approval of the appearance, landscaping, layout and scale of residential developments of 17 number dwelling houses, outline, permission, consent, reference 17/00934/out. So some of us actually been on the previous site visit, and those that yesterday had probably the first time they've seen it. So I believe there's nobody to speak on it, and there is no late representation. So who's taking this one, Chris? Go on, Gareth.
I'll be brief. Members visited the site to look at the layout and the detailed proposals. There was an issue and concern raised on the site by members with regards to the actual stability, safety of the rock face. I said that I had seen an assessment of that from Eastwood and Partners, which came in with the outline application, but with hindsight, probably I would suggest that we put a condition on any grant of permission that the full details of the actual mitigation and remediation measures are submitted to the for the officers to consider prior to any dwelling house being commenced in its erection on the site. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So, members, questions? No questions? I'll move straight into debate then. Councillor Purdy.
Chair, thank you for that, Gareth. I accept that recommendation. As you know, there was a concern expressed yesterday, so Chair, I'm happy to move the recommendations.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Fitzherbert.
Fascinating site. I'd like to second the motion. I wish them well in redeveloping it.
Okay, Councillor Slack.
Yes,
Yeah, I'll let you go.
I note it's reserve matters, Chris, but again, return to affordable housing. Will there be affordable housing eventually on this site?
Thank you, Councillor Slack. The in-principle development was established at outline stage, and no affordable housing was proposed. The affordable housing is in the form of an off-site financial contribution. So that's already been secured. Yeah, it's been secured on the back of the outline permission. This is the approval of reserve matters, so the layout of developments, general appearance, and landscaping, etc.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Nobody else down on my list. So it's been moved and seconded for approval. All those in favour, please show. Against? Abstentions? So that's 11-4 and 1 abstention, so it's been passed, it's been approved. Thank you very much, members. Item 5.4, which is erection of replacement dwelling house at associated garage and studio buildings at Kilnbank, Yorkcliffe Lane, Wirksworth. There is some later representation, so I'll let you read that first, members, before we move on. Okay, members, are you happy? Thank you. I have one speaker on this, Mr. Alan Cecil, works with local residents to speak against the application. You have 3 minutes, and I'll indicate when you have 30 seconds left.
See, my name's Alan Cecil. I'm a resident of Wirksworth, and I've got 4 issues really which concern me on this. In times of heavy rain, the runoff water flows both ways down Yokecliffe Lane, meeting at the back of number 43 Yokecliffe Crescent, which is my property. And it causes floodwater to run onto the property, and when receded, leaves a layer of silt on the patio, and also on Yokecliffe Crescent itself, which can be up to 4 inches thick, and it's absolutely disgusting. The flow of water is also eroding where it runs from the lane down onto my property and also onto the steps of the public footpath. The bottom step on the footpath is now dangerously high due to the erosion of the footpath, and the erosion from the lane into my property is becoming so deep. I'm getting really concerned that any wide vehicles who come down the lane will actually fall into the void and tumble into my property. As well as the damage caused by the water on the lane and the footpath, Yokecliffe Crescent is also being damaged due to the strong flow of water and silt. That aside, the second thing is, at the top of my property there's a limestone wall which carries the entire weight of Yokecliffe Lane. I have no idea how much weight this wall can tolerate, and I have no idea how large vehicles accessing and leaving the site with materials and waste will affect the load-bearing wall. Thirdly, the lane is surfaced with gravel and dirt, which I strongly suspect will be damaged by heavy goods vehicles. The lane is also a footpath, and we should adhere to the slogan used by the Peak National Park with regard to public footpaths: respect, protect and enjoy. Before work commences, I want complete assurance that any building work will not increase surface water runoff in the times of heavy rain, that the retaining walls
30 seconds left.
Are built to withstand the weight that is expected to be placed upon it. The lane is suitable for HGVs and the footpath retained. If planning is granted without these assurances, we have no option but to consider an application for a judicial review. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very succinct. So, Chris, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just coming back on a couple of points. There's a number of valid points made by the previous speaker, and members will have appreciated the narrowness of the lane that serves this particular property and its ability to accommodate heavy goods vehicles and construction traffic associated with the replacement dwelling on site. I think it would be prudent of members, in light of the comments received from the footpath organisations, to consider the use of that footpath and that access by construction vehicles. And my advice would be to impose a condition which required a condition survey of the existing track and a construction method statement which would agree the type of vehicles that would be accessing the site in association with the demolition and construction of the new house, and for any proposals to put back or put right any damage caused as a result of that activity. We have discussed that with the applicant. The applicant's agreeable to a condition along those lines, and I think that would protect or give some comfort to residents that they will not be severely affected by the development, and also users of that public right-of-way that follows the route of the lane to this site. With regards to drainage, there isn't a condition from what I can see attached to the report. The scale of development and nature of it is such that it's not an application that the lead local flood authority would comment on, but we do appreciate there are some localised flooding events that occur on this site. As part of the building regulations process, the applicant will need to demonstrate that the new dwelling will be appropriately drained, and that includes obviously foul sewage and surface water discharged from the site. And the preference will be for discharge through infiltration and then for discharge into either watercourse or sewer. And all that will need to be agreed. So I think members can rest assured, be confident that appropriate drainage will be put in place to serve this replacement dwelling, and perhaps should improve on that existing situation if there are if flood water or surface water is discharging onto the lane and onto other residents' property. Members, what it wouldn't cover is surface water discharge during the construction phase, and members may wish to impose a condition, and I think it's belt and braces. I think it is covered by the building regulations process, but they may wish to secure details of land drainage, both post-construction and during construction, to ensure that it's appropriately dealt with to not result in any detriment to neighbouring residents. And I think that's an entirely reasonable condition and something that the applicant would need to consider anyway as part of discharging the requirements as part of building regulations. Happy to take questions at that point.
Members, open to you. Councillor Slack.
Yes, the lane, there's a big drop over the on the left-hand side as you're coming on the lane, and if heavy goods do actually go on there, they could disturb that, and it could disintegrate that wall. You know, it's quite a drop. So I appreciate what you're saying about getting everything in place, but I think personally I'd go for a deferral so we could get a proper management plan in place.
We're in questions at the moment, Councillor Slack.
Well, it's a comment. I'll come back with that after. Can I come back for a comment after? Okay. Yeah, my question is like, have there anybody surveyed that wall? If it'll give way when heavy goods are coming out, has it been surveyed properly?
Well, it wouldn't be a requirement as part of this application, because you've got to take into consideration that the access is already used by vehicular traffic. There's nothing to prevent a delivery vehicle accessing the site currently.
So not use regular HGVs, obviously don't
no,
go on there.
And I think you've got to think with construction, it can be carried out in a number of different ways. You could have small delivery vehicles transporting materials to site and demolition equipment. It doesn't have to be HGVs, and that's why we can consider that as part of a plan. It doesn't need to be provided up front, in my view. It can be conditioned prior to any construction activity taking place.
Okay, Councillor Slack.
Thank you.
Councillor Purdy.
I welcome those comments, Chris, and obviously picked up yesterday, and you've got part of that condition on paper. I'd like to see a condition that no HGV vehicles, because there's a classification of an heavy goods vehicle, I think it's over 4.5 tonnes, so it's got to be vehicles below that. I think that it's very generous of the applicant to say that he'll agree to these conditions, but with respect to everybody that lives there, he can't pick up the whole of the responsibility for this, because that track's been there for donkey's years. So I don't think it can all fall on him. And it seems to me that there's more work required on this, probably through the county councillor and with highways officers, to determine what more, if anything, can be done. So I'm just a bit concerned for the applicant. He shouldn't bear complete responsibility for this. I think he's got a duty, certainly in demolition and construction, absolutely. But I mean, there's always been water runoff there, and that's not been his problem before, so I don't think it should be his now. So I think your conditions are right. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Buttle.
This is not an adopted track, and if it collapsed, would the county council have any responsibility whatsoever?
None.
Unless there was something that endangered the public, then I don't think this comes within their remit of their statutory powers. So if it is remains private, then it is a civil matter between the landowners.
So if we put in a condition that we have an engineer go through and say that this bit of wall's okay, this bit of wall's okay, this bit's wall's okay, and we're wrong, or they're wrong, will their insurance cover it, or will it be something that drops in with the applicant? Would they become responsible for those costs?
I think you're just asking a bit of a loaded question there in terms of.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no. It's fine, but you're asking, to kind of think of different scenarios and what would happen. And you're asking about professional indemnity insurance for the surveyors that that go out, and I think that's something that anybody who does employ surveyors to do work on your behalf, then they are insured to give that advice. So I think that's what you're really asking, if this wall does.
In that case, I'll come back to Chris
Yeah.
now. If we detail a condition for this wall to be surveyed, will it be surveyed by someone with professional indemnity insurance? Is that something that you would do?
Can I just clarify that what I'm recommending is that construction management be agreed, so that includes the type of vehicles that will access the site to carry out demolition and construction work, the times that they might visit the site, how they'll deal with potential conflict with people using the public right of way. We're not asking them to go as far as carrying out detailed structural assessments of walls, because we think that goes beyond the remit and reasonableness of the condition we can attach to this application.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Sack.
Comment now, Chair. Yeah, in the light of the significant concerns raised by the residents yesterday at the site visit we attended over the problems that may arise with the use of the unadopted Cliff Lane, I propose that the application be deferred pending a submission by a real proper engineer to look at the wall before any work commences, obviously, and if it's deferred, it'll give us time to do a proper assessment and then engineer works. We owe it to the people of Cliff Crescent to below again, as we don't want everything collapsing in the gardens. So I think we owe it to them, the residents of the area, for a deferral and get a proper engineer to look at the wall.
So you wanted to move it for defer?
Yeah. So I'll move for a deferral.
Can I come back? Yeah, of course you can.
Yeah. Could I just in response to Councillor Slack there, in imposing conditions, they have to meet statutory tests, and one of the tests is that a planning condition has to be necessary for a development to be acceptable in planning terms. What you've got to appreciate here is that if the current property owner wants to carry out substantial renovations to their house, they could use a construction company that would need to travel and access the site without any restrictions, and I think it's unreasonable to put that kind of requirement on the applicant in this particular case. I think we can control construction management to try and encourage and liaise with the county council and the rights of way section to make sure that the types of vehicles that are accessing the site can do so and manoeuvre around the site safely and exit the site safely, and perhaps not of a size that, as Councillor Purdy suggested, HGV vehicles. But I think going beyond that would be unreasonable, and we wouldn't be meeting the tests for applying for using conditions.
I think a deferral is needed tonight, Chris, because if a proper engineer comes and the members need to look at the engineering report when he brings it to committee, so we need to defer it and then bring it back to committee with a proper engineer's report on this. It doesn't want to just be put on one side and say we'll look at it and we'll pass it tonight and then something goes wrong. Let's get the engineer's report and then we can look at it again.
Yeah, just to clarify, it goes outside the remit of this application. We can't ask the developer to carry out a structural assessment of a wall that sits outside of the application site, which carries a road upon which they have a right to cross over.
Right, thank you very much. Councillor Fitzherbert.
Yeah, I assume there's a right of way to the property down this track as well, and if you go to the end of the track there's a field, so you would have thought that tractors and trailers go there occasionally, unless they access, it's all access from the other end, and there has been a track there for a long time. I take on board exactly what the speaker said about his concerns for his properties. You know, all of the properties I'm sure have got concerns right there. I come back to the conditions that I think that Chris mentioned at the start of this debate, the start of this application, that basically let's have considerate builders, you know, and I'm right behind that. We have seen other applications all over the Dales where there's been dodgy accesses and dodgy accesses. I remember the one that Councillor Bull mentioned up in St Oswald's about coming in. Well, that was timing, wasn't it? Between 9 and 5 or something at St Oswald's. You know, and I think the conditions, I accept that when we were on site yesterday, the concerns of the residents and of Councillor Ratcliffe, who lives right next door. but you would have thought tractors and trailers and other vehicles have been visiting that particular property for a number of years. It looked at least 50 years old, maybe more. And I would have thought that Chris's conditions cover that. I hope I'm not proved wrong, quite substantially. And I don't think there's any planning reason to get in the way of this application. And I'd like to move it, please.
Councillor Purdy.
I'll second that. Chris took the words out of my mouth when I'd got my hand up, because it is out of our remit. And how far do we take this? So I can't agree with deferral. I think it answers Mr Settle's point with the conditions, because we are conditioned of timing, weight of vehicles and so forth, and that management plan that the officer has put forward should hopefully ameliorate all the neighbours' concerns down there and get a, as Councillor Fitzherbert said, hopefully a local considerate building company, and so that will be done before anything starts. So I'm happy to second it, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Gamble.
So just a small thing. If we're going to condition the HGV, I think HGV start at 3.5, don't they? Not 4.5. So if we're going to specify a weight, I think it possibly should be 3.5.
What we're suggesting is to agree a construction management plan. So I think the applicant is probably tuning into this debate and this meeting this evening, and will take away the message that members feel that HGV vehicles using that track would be inappropriate, and they can consider smaller vehicles to carry out the construction and demolition works. But it's something we'll agree with consultation, having consulted the Highway Authority and the Rights of Way team.
I understand what you're saying. I'm just saying, I think Councillor Purdy said he thought that HGV start at 4.5. I think they start at 3.5.
Thank you. Councillor Purdy, I know you're on about hours of operation. It's listed in the
conditions, yeah.
Yeah, it's listed in the condition at 14, and I know you're a little bit concerned about weekend working. I mean, I know they've got them down here for Saturday from 8 till 1. Are you wanting to just do Monday to Friday?
I personally would prefer it be Monday to Friday only, and not
Monday
Saturdays to keep weekends free. But I'm happy to go with what the members think.
Councillor Fitzherbert, are you happy with that?
Not really.
Right.
No. Sometimes you've got to get a job done, you know, and I think you've got to use Saturdays. You might have lost the Friday or something. I'm sorry, but no. Sorry.
No. Okay. Anybody else want to speak in debate? No? It's been moved and seconded for approval. All those in favour, please show.
See, we can smile when we disagree.
Yeah, exactly. Against? Any abstentions? So that's been carried, it's been approved. Thank you very much, members. Moving swiftly on, item 5.5, application number 21/00341 full, conversion of garage with two-storey extension, single-storey extension, loft conversion at 33 Intake Lane, Cromford. There is some late representation on it, so I'll let you read that first before we go to the speaker. What I need from the floor is an agreement to extend the meeting. Move it. Second. All those in favour, please show. That's carried. Anyway, members, thank you very much. The gentleman that's down to speak is Mr Dan Lancaster, Agent Architect and Landscape, to speak in favour of the application. You have 5 minutes and I'll indicate when you have 30 seconds left.
The occupants of 33 Intake Lane are a mother running a business in pharmaceuticals, her daughter working for the NHS and granddaughter of school age. They've spent 2 years searching for a suitable home in the Cromford area within their budget until finding this one, and fully intend for it to become their family home, not a development to make money. Their intentions have always been to proceed according to the rules and regulations. The property has been extended and renovated to offer more living and working space so that this intergenerational family can live and work together comfortably and effectively in one house. The number of bedrooms in the scheme remains the same as before, i.e. 3. The extra space will afford mother, daughter and granddaughter more space to call their own and to work and live together effectively. The COVID-19 pandemic has forced us to think differently about home working as a truly viable option for many, and it's undergoing a dramatic upsurge in popularity as a result. Companies and individuals have both seen the benefits, and there are additional efficiencies to the principle. The loft is to be converted to serve as an office, of which the forward-facing dormer is essential for headroom. It will be smaller than others on the street, with fewer windows, and be clad in a muted colour to blend into the roof slope. Its position is dictated by function. The rear roof light is high level, will serve to improve light admittance for desk working and provide cross ventilation in warm weather. The office will allow one of the 2 home working occupants to work in a separate space out of earshot for confidentiality reasons imposed by their specific and sensitive careers. The existing driveway is very short and steep, making entering and exiting via car virtually impossible, and a lack of storage in the existing house means the garage is more useful for things other than a car. Roadside parking is therefore the only viable option at present, but without a turning head at its end, this too is less than ideal. The proposals relocate the protruding section of the garage to the other side of the front elevation, forming a discrete store for bikes, etc., nestled into the rise in the land near the boundary fence. This then allows the driveway to be extended in length and width to become more usable as a result. The remainder of the existing garage behind is to be converted to a shower room for the relocated upper ground floor bedroom behind it, the existing one having been converted to a utility and toilet off the entrance hall. On the other side of the house, the kitchen will be extended into the existing side porch, which will be slightly enlarged to the rear by 1.9 metres, allowing for an island unit within the room. The slot window at the rear will hug the existing gable wall, i.e. furthest away from the neighbour, and the adjoining wall will then be filled with full-height units. Together, these acts will minimise overlooking of the neighbouring property over and above what currently exists, where there are full-height glass doors at present. Photos have been submitted as part of late reps. We therefore feel obscure glazing here is excessive. The slot window will in effect be the only window to the kitchen, as the wider entrance glazing has been amended down in width at the planner's request. The existing living spaces hall and staircase down will remain as they currently are. Downstairs, the main bedroom will get a new ensuite bathroom under the bedroom extension above, and will be accessed via the former ensuite bathroom, which will be converted to a walk-through wardrobe. The space this will occupy is currently unusable and redundant. The rest of this level will remain the same, aside from widening the central corridor to the garden by borrowing space from the main bedroom. The properties in this area are not conventional in that they are upside down in layout. The designs, although contemporary, update an already modernist architecture, and the flat roof aesthetic either side of the main pitched roof house is being retained. The extensions will be faced in matching brickwork with a single accent colour, bringing together fascias, doors and window frames to tone with new roof tiles, specific colour to be agreed via condition. Only at lower ground floor level and to the rear will there be contemporary cladding, again to harmonise with the other accents and wrap over large windows set at an angle to look to the centre of the private garden. The narrow perpendicular panels will be solid and not glass, forming ventilation apertures only. I hope you will agree that these proposals harmonise well with the existing, offering a high quality bespoke design for the specific needs of the occupants, and therefore move to take
30 seconds left.
Thank you. Officer recommendation and approve accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, members. Who's taking this one? Chris is taking it.
Thank you, Chair. Just coming back on a couple of points there. Members will note from the late representation sheet that there is a request for members to consider one of the conditions that requires the windows which are positioned at an acute angle on the rear elevation and serving the kitchen to be glazed in obscure glass. The case officer that's looked at this application has deemed that condition to be necessary to protect the privacy of the occupants of an adjacent dwelling, although there is a request there for members to consider the appropriateness of that condition. I think if members were minded to remove that condition or to revise it in any way, that a site visit would be beneficial, because I think to anyone, to the public out there and to the people that have made representations, I think there's an assumption from their perspective that a condition will be imposed. I think it's important that members consider the impacts of any changes on the residential amenity of those people. Happy to take questions at this stage.
Questions, members? No? No questions? I'll move. Councillor Purdy.
Thank you, Chair. Well, it's my ward, and I did say in my submission I've no objection unless there are any significant neighbour objections or any objections from the Conservation Forum. I personally think that we should keep the glazed aspect because it is important to protect neighbours' rights, etc., and privacy. So I'm prepared to move the recommendations, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Buttle.
Are we not putting one floor on top of another, and so therefore it's a permitted development?
I think you may be talking about the new provisions which allow additional stories to be added to properties. This is a split level property because of the severe difference in levels. It presents itself as single story to the street, but then it's a two-story property at the rear, if that makes sense. So we're not adding floors. But,
so we're not adding floors?
And there wouldn't be, there'd still be a prior notification procedure to follow, even if that was the intention. So it would still be an application to us for us to consider that. It'd just be a different application type. So it's not permitted development. You can't just do it, for example.
Thank you.
Right, thank you very much. Councillor Donnelly.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Well, yes, I went on the visit yesterday as well, so I'm quite happy to second the recommendation.
Thank you very much, Councillor Donnelly. Councillor Gamble.
Sorry, just for clarification, could you show me the elevation that's got the obscured window? Or at least point out which one's going to be the obscured one.
No, go forward. Sorry, go. Yeah, that one. That's fine. Yeah. So if you can see on that plan, you've got the outshot to the side. You know, the flat roof section. Can you see the slot window? You can't really appreciate it on there, but it's in recess. So you see that slot window in the.
Is it the one that's in the
left-hand
sort of
side?
roof-looking thing?
No, the image at the bottom left.
Is it that the little?
There's a slot window
right
on
the
that
left.
far left-hand side.
Oh, right.
In recess, so it's that window which serves a kitchen, and then you've got the windows at ground floor level angled. And my reading of that condition would be a requirement for those windows to be.
Yeah. So I just wondered. So that's the only window that serves the kitchen at all?
Yeah. If you look at the layout, the kitchen, that window serves the kitchen, but because they're proposing a store in front of projecting me on the principal elevation, the opportunity for a window in the frontage of the bungalow or the house has been lost. So it's the only window serving that space.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else want to speak, debate now? In which case it's been moved and seconded, grant with conditions. All those in favour, please show. All against? Abstentions? That's been carried unanimously. Thank you very much. And the last bit of substantial business for us to do tonight is application number 21/00722 full. It's creation of a vehicle access and working area with turntable at Tag Hill Cottage, 43 Church Street, Matlock. Don't believe there's any late correspondence on it, but we have one speaker, and that's Dr. Anne Phillips, applicant, to speak in favour of the application. You have 5 minutes, and I'll indicate when you have 30 seconds left.
Thank you, Chair, and members of the committee who came to view the site yesterday. I've asked for this proposal to be considered by the Planning Committee because in the Highways Authority's reasons for refusal, there are discrepancies with the plans I've submitted, plans I shared with them at the very outset of the planning process. Because of the obvious challenges inherent in this application, I sought a constructive dialogue with the authority and a site visit, requests which were not taken up. The Conservation Officer and, having seen the site, the planning officers have offered no objection, and I'm grateful to Councillor Hughes and his colleagues for supporting its progress here this evening. I'll briefly put the application in context and then refer only to the points at issue. Moving to Tag Hill Cottage 8 years ago, I was happy with the parking available on nearby common land, although limited sight lines often cause obstruction when entering and exit. That's still the case. Roads in these historic parts of Matlock weren't constructed for motor transport, and all driving and parking presents challenges. Recently, demand for parking has increased with extra vehicles per property, including holiday let and commercial vehicles. At evenings and weekends, it's often difficult to park close to home, other local parking also being limited. Originally a shop, my early 19th century property is understood to have had vehicle access, which in the 1900s was closed with new walling, thus restricting what we presume was a clear downhill sightline. Thus, I explored the feasibility of creating on-site parking with help from an experienced civil engineer. The climate crisis now upon us, reinforced yesterday by the IPCC report and addressed by our Council's Climate Strategy, Change Strategy and Action Plan, enhanced my motivation, since it will provide the opportunity to purchase and to charge an electric vehicle. I resonated with Councillor Purdy's recent comment that all planning applicants must now think seriously about green energy policies, which must surely include provision for electric vehicles. I now address the specific issues raised. 1. Highway safety has been prioritised in the proposal. Bearing in mind the topography of the Church Street site, the only viable entry has to be downhill from the direction of St Giles Church. Entry from an uphill direction from the A615 would not be viable, as the width of the road and common sense would prohibit any attempted entry from that direction. Entry from the St Giles direction, however, would be very straightforward, with clear lines of sight down towards the A615 before making a turn into the proposed driveway. Exit would always be uphill for similar reasons. I submit that road conditions and common sense exert their own controls over entry and exit, resulting in no onerous manoeuvres. 2. Concern was expressed on the site visit over the parking of a second vehicle on the driveway when the turntable is occupied. I share this concern, especially regarding any future owner of the property, although I'm not proposing to sell in the near future. I wonder how this committee might respond to my exploring the installation of a mechanical or electronic or even legal solution to this, so that when one car is on site, access to a second vehicle is prohibited. 3. Turntable. On your site visit, you saw the area marked out where a turntable will fit neatly. Regarding operational concerns, turntables are reliable and low maintenance. I've drawn your attention to a similar installation approved by both this Planning Committee and Highways Authority in 2016 for safe exit onto the A6 in Darley Dale. I'm told this has worked without incident since its installation. 4. Sightlines. My proposed exit would have a good line of sight uphill, and to ensure a similar sightline in the downhill direction, it is the judgment of my professional advisor that a stepped lowering of the retaining wall beyond the proposed exit and the sloping back of the garden would achieve the necessary sightline as we believe it was originally. The acute angle of vehicle exit uphill would, I suggest, further enhance the line of sight from the driver's side of a vehicle waiting on the drive to make that exit safely. The recent accidental damage to the wall has demonstrated that the creation of a clear line
30
of
seconds
sight
left.
from the proposed exit is indeed achievable. The piers will be relocated on site for conservation purposes. The proposed improvements to the downhill sightline are a key element in ensuring the safety aspects of the proposal, and when achieved would ensure that it meets the Council's requirements in full. So I conclude my proposal does give proper regard to the appropriate and necessary safety issues raised by the Highways Authority, that a clear line of sight required by Highways guidelines in both directions would be created, complying with policy S3 of the adopted Derbyshire Dales Local Plan 2017.
Thank you very much, Dr. Phillips.
Thank you.
Thank you. Chris, over to you.
Just coming back on a couple of those points. Members obviously had the benefit of visiting this site yesterday to assess the impacts of an access in the location proposed on highway safety, and also the character and appearance of the conservation area. You'll note from the officer's report that the impacts on the character and appearance of the conservation area aren't considered to result in harm, requiring there to be a need for the public benefit to outweigh that harm. The issue here, in very simple terms, is that the access onto the road at such an acute angle is such that you have to leave the site in one direction. That can't be controlled. To manoeuvre within the site, you have to have a turntable arrangement. The maintenance of that, the ongoing use of it, again, cannot be controlled. It's very difficult to control the number of vehicles that would be parked on that access road as well. So you could have a scenario where you had a vehicle parked on the turntable, another vehicle that turned up and parked behind that vehicle, resulting in potential for dangerous vehicle manoeuvres onto the highway. The Highway Authority have provided their comments in terms of why they feel the development is unacceptable and prejudicial to highway safety. And we obviously share those views, hence why we're recommending refusal of this application. I do appreciate there is some very modest benefit to having a charging point to serve an electric vehicle on this site, but members will recall similar applications, an application at Rodsley where accesses were formed onto a classified highway, and one of the benefits that were proposed as part of that application was electric charging points. But that was given very little weight by the appointed inspector that looked at that appeal, and the impacts on just character and appearance in that case was considered to outweigh that benefit. Here we're dealing with an access that is substandard and prejudicial to highway safety, and that weighs heavily against the application. Happy to take questions at this stage.
Questions, members. Councillor Purley.
Are you able to comment on what Dr. Parker said in relation to highways? Was it a desktop exercise, or do you know if they visited the site? There does seem to be a conflict of opinion here.
I can't clarify that. I mean, usually when we consult the Highway Authority, they will carry out an assessment, and with it being so close to the county offices, I'd expect that a site visit would have been undertaken.
I'll come back in debate if I may.
No, Councillor Buttle.
I was going to move for a deferment until we know that a council highways officer has actually been there and checked it out, rather than got the wrong end of the stick and thought that the approach was going the wrong way. Because when we went there yesterday, there's only one way to get out of there. You're not going to turn right. It's just not going to be a possibility. And I can't see how the highways officer thought that was going to be a possibility without him having the wrong end of the stick. So I'd really like to allow that as an option, if that's possible.
Chris.
Yeah, could I just clarify, or just come back on that particular point? I think it's clear in the response that we've had that there is an expectation or an acknowledgement that you could only safely exit the site in one direction. And that is part of the issue. We can't control that going forward in terms of how people enter and exit the site. What we can establish from what's proposed is the acute angle at which this access is onto the classified road is such that you can only manoeuvre or exit the site in one direction. But policing that going forward, and also policing how the use of a turntable, is not something that can be controlled under planning, unfortunately. And it has the potential, whether it's this owner, future owner, to result in dangerous manoeuvres onto the highway.
Yes, I got that, Chris, and thank you. And I still think that the highways officer, if he'd gone there, would have realised, or she'd gone there, would have realised that there isn't even a possibility of going two ways. So one way was the only way it was going to go. So why did they mention manoeuvring in the centre of a road which is actually shorter than a car? So it doesn't convince me, the highways thing, and I'd be happy to defer it if anyone else wants
Councillor
to
Burford.
with that.
I was looking at what Councillor Hughes said as ward member, and the thing that struck me was that he says that GCC interpreted this to mean access would be from the direction of Matlock, which, as they point out, would require complex manoeuvring. So I actually agree with what Councillor Buttle's saying. If that is true, that they interpreted it to mean access from Matlock, they can't have gone out to have a look, because absolutely no one, certainly not a highway engineer, could possibly, nobody could contemplate accessing from the Matlock side. So it was always going to be access to and from the other direction. So I think Councillor Buttle's quite right there, that I'm not convinced that they've been out and looked at it. So I would go along with a deferral. I think we've got to make absolutely sure that that they know what is being proposed, and then therefore they can give a, you know, if they come back with the same advice, then that's fair enough. But I'm not satisfied at the moment that they've actually looked at it.
Just coming back on that point, I think it's a fair comment, and I think you look at the second paragraph of their comments, and I think they've clearly made an error in terms of what they've stated, because you look at the site location plan, and they clearly state there vehicles will only enter and exit the site from the north. I think what they're probably trying to say is they'll only enter the site from the north, and not exit it as well in that direction, which I think is a bit misleading. But I think it's clear from the plot plan for this site and the proposed location of the access that what they meant is clear, but obviously it's not being relayed accurately in the
then
comments.
That's not acceptable, is it? That you've been put in the position of trying to work out what they mean, and we need to know precisely what they're saying, having looked at this site.
I think we know from obviously visiting the site and understanding how the access would be utilised and used, but you're right. I mean, we can seek that clarification, but I think we know what the answer is.
Yeah, I don't think it's fair on the applicant that we don't defer this, and that I think it's fair on the applicant, I should say, that we do defer this, because we need to be absolutely clear what the county council are saying.
I think it's entirely reasonable, but I wouldn't add anything other than I think it's clear how the access will be used and the implications on highway safety, having visited the site. But I think if you need that clarification to make an informed decision, then I accept that.
I mean, I would just like to say, you know, I mean, the county council has actually sat round the table, so maybe so you could have an input into highways and chivvy them along, give them a kick up the back passage or whatever. Anyway. Councillor Purdy.
Well, I'm sorry, Dr. Box, I have to wait so long for this item last on the agenda. But there is doubt. There is doubt, and I think
we're
that...
in questions.
Sorry? There is doubt, and I think in fairness to the applicant, as Councillor Beaufort said, and I'm sure the highways will come back with the same answer. I have to tell you, Dr. Parker, when highways say no, we really have to follow their advice. So it might come back no, but I think for the sake of fairness and clarity, I think we should defer, Chair, and get that clarity. Because, you know, we've got it on paper and it's casting doubt.
Councillor Gamble.
Right, I was going to say the same thing basically, because the question I was going to have is, given the first item we had the agenda, that someone has the right to submit if they think that inaccurate information has been used in determination of an application. Presumably the lady would have the right to resubmit this on the basis that inaccurate information was possibly used. So yeah, the most sensible thing surely seems to be to defer.
So anyway, I'll move into debate. So it's been moved and seconded for deferral by Councillor Buttle and Councillor Beaufort. I'm not going to take any more on this, so we'll go to the vote for. So it'll be deferred for lined out and go back to the highways and seek clarification on what they say. Yes, we'll bring it back. So
next meeting.
Yeah. So Sue, you'll have to do some pretty good bloody talking up here in the highways department. But anyway, so it's moved for a deferral. As set out. All those in favour, please shout. All those against? And any abstentions? So it's been carried for deferral. So, Sue, get on that computer tonight and send the cabinet member a nice email. Anyway. Now, thank you very much for your forbearance in that, members. So now there's only a bit of housekeeping to do, which is information on active and closed informant. It's only for noting, so I'll move it for noted. Second. All those in favour, please show. Thank you very much. And the next item is Appeals Progress Report. Chris, is there anything you want to add before I move it for noted? Nope. Anyway, I'll second chair. All those in favour, please show. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, members. Have a pleasant journey home. I'm sure the traffic will be not as bad as what it was when you arrived.